Well, the last speaker we have of today's presentation, part of the conference, is going to speak about a most profound subject that affects all of us, directly and indirectly. It's about the subject of money. Money and banking. We all have some money. Most of us do something with banks, some kind of a business in some way. But what is really money? And why is it that we have money problems in America? If you think back 100 years ago, in 1910, we did not have no airplanes. We did not have no computers, no cell phones. Telephone was hardly out there. Most people did not have telephones. Most people did not have cars. Women never worked out of the home. Almost never. People owned their home outright cash, or maybe they had maybe 5 or 10-year mortgage. We had more time to spend with our families, with our communities. Even though we did not have all these means of fast transportation and communication and efficiency, we are running a rat race. Why? Despite all these technological advances. And our next speaker will share with you why. The answer is understanding the nature and function of money and banking. And by knowing that and understanding it, the solution that he presents you will become very clear. Please help me give a warm hand of welcome to our next speaker from Minnesota, Mr. Byron Dale.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank you all for allowing me to be here, and I particularly want to thank Payon. If I didn't pronounce that right, I apologize. Frankly, I'm a little tired. I've been working here all day, but I really want to really thank the people who put this on. I believe this is one of the best round conferences I've ever attended in my life, and I've done quite a few of these in the past. I don't do many more. And I want to get in. And my presentation is all about how money was taken from presentation of wealth to representation of debt. And then we wonder how we can get back to where money is once again a representation of debt. But I think I want to start. I'm sure you guys have all noticed I'm bald. When I first started to get that, the hair started to go way up here, and everybody said that was because I was a great thinker. Then it got bald back here, and everybody said it was because I was a great lover. Now it's bald like this, and my wife says it's because you just think you're a great lover. Okay, click, and let's go on to the first slide. Now, I'm sure you agree with me that we all know, and they're constantly reminded daily, that we're in financial trouble in this nation. We're having clearly severe unemployment problems. We're having increased bankruptcies, not personally, but even we have states that are on the verge of bankruptcy. We have growing monetary shortages. Obviously, they're talking today, I heard in the news, they just got to cut the entitlement programs, Social Security and retirement, and 46 states are, they tell me, in financial trouble. Click. And the question is just why are we having all this financial trouble? We have lots of people that want to work, so lots of labor is available. We have raw resources, probably one of the greatest raw resources nation in the world, or close to. What's missing? Why do we have recessions? Now, what you're seeing is a comic book drawing out of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And it says clearly what the problem is. Without enough money, economic activity slows and unemployment rises. And it's impossible to have an economic downturn unless the bankers pull back the money supply. All nature is geared to grow and reproduce. Have you ever noticed that? Every plant, every animal, every person I know almost has a great desire to reproduce. And we all come from a seed, or one way or the other. We all want to grow and mature and spread more seed. So why do we ever have downturns? It's an unnatural situation. Why do we have a shortage of money when we have so many people out here constantly telling us the government is printing way too much? Now, I want some participation in this. I want everybody here to raise their hand if they have too much money. How many people here would be willing to raise their hand if they have too much debt? Well, see, I believe the problem is not too much money. I believe the problem is too much debt. And I have another question, too. How in the world is the government that can print its own money, and I've been down to Washington, D.C. and watched them print it, how in the world can they be short of money? Well, I've had people tell me, well, don't worry about the debt because we can print up the money to pay it. Well, if we can do that, why didn't we print up the money and not borrow it in the first place? We are told the United States is the richest nation in the world and has the largest economy in the world, producing around $14 trillion worth of goods and services a year. And I just heard that on the radio the other day. And if my biggest question, and this is the question that got me into this whole thing and studying this whole thing in the very beginning, how in the world did the nation get $59 trillion in debt, and it was only about 20 then, when all we do and all we've done for the last 200 years produce wealth or provide services enhancing it? Just please tell me how you get in debt up to your eyeballs when you do nothing all day but produce wealth. Especially when we can print our own money to make that production flow through the economy. There's got to be some real problems here. It's time we ask, what do we use for money? Just how does it get created? How does it move into circulation after it had been created? And believe it or not, that is the most important element of all. It's not what we use for money, it's how that money is used and how that money flows into circulation so you and I can get a hold of it and use it. To get these answers, I wrote to the United States Treasury and other places and got these answers. This is a copy of the book I sell. It's the second book I ever produced. And I got to tell you a story about this book. I was out giving a speech, didn't have hardly anything in those days, and all I had was the one book that's out there, my personal story, how I got into this. But I always used these letters from the Treasury to explain what I was trying to do as a source of where I got my information from. And a guy walked up and said, have you got any of those letters? I'd like to have copies. And I said, no. Would you make me some? And he threw down some money, and I said, well, yeah. And the next guy threw down some money, and the next guy, and the next guy, and I said, oh. So I went home and I told my wife, I said, you know, if we put all them letters together in a book, I'd have another book to sell to help me pay my expenses while I'm on the road doing this, because I wasn't getting paid by anybody. So she took a $10 bill, she photocopied it on the copy machine, she trimmed it all up, and that's where this cover came from, that night in her office on the copy machine. And we're going to go through this, and I meant to bring that book with me up here, but that's okay, I got it memorized. When we first started, I sent a letter to the Treasury and asked them several questions. And the main question we're going to deal with, what is money? Where does it come from? And how does it get in circulation so you and I can use it? Russell Monk from the General Counsel wrote back and said the actual creation of money always involved an extension of credit by private commercial banks. Now what he really said is there is no money till you go to the bank and borrow it. Now you want to think about that real strong. Then my next question was, well, if all money is created as an interest-bearing loan, where does the money come from to pay the interest? Because, you know, I have probably borrowed as much money as most of you in my lifetime, and I always got just exactly the amount I borrowed. How about you guys? But then when I went to pay it back, he always wanted that same money back plus a lot more. In fact, one time about 19 to 22% more. So I wrote Mr. Monk, pardon me, and he said the money to pay the interest on the money on the loans comes from the same source the other money comes from, which means you got to go back to the bank and borrow some more. Now later on, a friend I met, He wrote to the Treasury and asked him basically the same question, and John Yetter, attorney advisor for the Treasury, answered that, and he said, well, the money that one borrower uses to pay interest on a loan has been created somewhere else in the economy by another loan. So that means I borrow the money and spend it to do something. I used to borrow it to buy calves. And then, of course, it was very interesting because the first time I did that, I sold them in a sale barn and it didn't work very good. And so I said, we got to figure out a way. So my wife and I sat down and wrote a letter and we sent it to all the production credit associations in northern Iowa, eastern Nebraska, and southern South Dakota. And one of them answered the letter. And so he come up and he wanted to buy the calves, and we made a deal and we sold them that way for several years. And it was kind of interesting. It really taught me a thing because we borrowed the money from PCA to buy the calves. He borrowed the money from PCA to buy the calves, and the packer borrowed the money from somebody else to pay for the fat cattle, and then the consumers borrow the money from the banks to consume the meat. You are beginning to have a clue why we're so deep in debt? And then it went on, and I wrote to Tom Daschle, Senator of South Dakota at that time, and asked him questions. He didn't answer them, but he did send me an interesting book from the Library of Congress, and in it it said, John B. Hendrickson, Congressional Research Service, said, money is created when loans are issued and debts incurred. Money is extinguished when loans are repaid. So once you repay your loan, that money is destroyed and does not exist again until somebody else borrows it. But you have to also pay the bank interest, which goes into them as an interest profit, and they get that money to use. If all the bank loans were paid, no one would have a bank deposit and there would not be a dollar of coin or currency in circulation. Now, the federal government prints a currency, but when they do it, they sell it to banks for the cost of printing. And when they need the money, they go to the bank and borrow it back at face value to spend it. You may want to know what's the bank getting the benefit of the new money. Since the bank owns the new money, while the customer has merely borrowed the money, the bank does indeed get the benefit of the new money. And I'll let you know that banks created money in this way long before our Federal Reserve System was created. That isn't where the problem started. What you see now is a picture of a funny book that I got from it's called The Story of Banks from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And I go through this particularly because I really want to show you something. And it says, and this is one of the cartoons, because of the fractional reserve banking system, banks as a whole can expand our money supply several times by making loans and in investments. Commercial banks, however, lend in a different way. They create new checkbook dollars and add them to the borrower's checking account. And don't kid yourself. Now here again, they clearly tell us that the banks create new money by making checkbook dollars and add them to the borrower's checking account. Now I want you to really stop and think about what I'm going to say now, because all words are used for three purposes: to educate, to inform, to entertain, or deceive. And every time you hear everybody speak, including me, you better think about it. Is he trying to use the words to inform you, to entertain you, or deceive you? And I'm going to show you that many times they do both in the same exact writings. Here's how our money is created. Banks create all new money as a book entry in their ledgers. Numbers are what we use for money. And I'm going to skip on, go to the next page. And here's the T-chart that will show you exactly how that happens. And with your permission, I don't have a pointer, I'm going to go up here, and I want to really get you to see this, because you see this $1,000 on this side. Let's just start with that. Look at it as that's the only numbers we have up there. So I go into the bank and I want to borrow $1,000. And I've done that way more times than you want to know. And I'm required to sign a promissory note after we agree how much I want to borrow, and he's agreed to loan it to me. So then he takes my promissory note and it goes on the books of the bank as a liability to me and an asset to the bank. So now he takes that same amount and transfers it over into my checking account. Now this is money I didn't have and I needed to get, so he takes what I didn't have and turns it into money that I can spend. And he does that by simply writing the same amount of numbers in my checking account as a liability to the bank and an asset to me. Now we both have a new asset and a new liability. But I have to pay him interest on my liability, and he don't pay us interest on his. And even though it is a liability, he don't have to pay it, except when we draw that money out of the checking account and I write a check to you and give it to you, that money transfers to you and you put it into the bank. They have a brand new liability and now you have a new asset. And then they go ahead and say that, and again I repeated myself, so let's just skip on because I think I'm going to have more material here than I really want to use. So now let's go back to the ledgers again and look at them. We want to look at them very close because now we all know once we borrow that money, the bank's going to want more money in interest. So if we add the interest to 10%, that means going to now I switch to 100. Don't let that bother you. We now are going to owe $110, but the money supply is only 100, is how much was loaned and put into circulation. So now I have a real problem. Now remember what John Yetter said? Before the borrower can pay the interest on the loan, there must be another borrower, because once I spend the money, if I spend it to you, I'd either have to go to you and capture it all back by building widgets or feeding cattle or whatever we do. Then I get that money back, but I'd still be short of money. I couldn't pay the bank. So if we didn't have another borrower, I'd have to go bankrupt. If every loan stood on its own, every borrower would go bankrupt every time they made a loan. Okay, well now when you borrow, then you can borrow more money, so now I can sell you some more stuff I made, and I can capture your money, and then I can use that to pay the interest of the bank. When that flows over, again, we see that that money is extinguished, because if I write a $110 check out of a $110 bank account, that leaves me zero in the bank account, doesn't it? When I write that check, it goes over into my loan account, 100 goes over to pay off my loan, and $10 goes up in the reserve account, in the profit account of the bank. Are you all following this? Okay, now that will also bring that zero, that whole account system down to zero, won't it? That's exactly how money is extinguished, because that money no longer exists, and I get my checking, I get my promissory note back, and I can frame it or I can burn it, whatever you feel like. And this is exactly what happens every time with every loan. And the only way to keep this system going is every generation has to get deeper in debt than the last one. Now you think about that. Every generation has to get deeper in the last one, deeper in debt than the last one, or this system cannot function. There is no way in our system to make final payment. Our debts must constantly grow all the time on every generation, more and more. And I can't stress that enough. Now let's look at this. This is a picture of the Federal Reserve book, Purposes and Function, put out by the Federal Reserve Board of Washington, D.C. And it says, all bank deposits are a form of credit. Basically, they represent amounts owed by banks to depositors. They come into existence by exchange of bank promises to pay customers for the various assets which banks acquire. Currency, promissory notes of businesses, consumers, and other customers. Mortgages on real estate and government and other securities. So we're paying interest on something the banks owe us. Yet they can take our property because we don't pay them. And personally, I believe that if you can buy everything with a promise to pay, you don't have to pay, you get everything for free, don't you? It seemed like a logical thing to me. In fact, I personally sued the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis on their notes. And I'll get into that a little later. Now let's go on, and this is a thing out of the Modern Money Mechanics, a workbook on demand deposit currency and bank reserves. This was actually sent to me by the Vice President of the Federal Intermediate Bank of Omaha. And on page 4 it says, then banks discovered they could make loans by merely giving the borrowers their promises to pay, which are banknotes. I think they should have said, what they should have said was, when the banks discovered they could make loans merely by giving borrowers their promise to pay, they knew they had the keys to the total kingdom. And don't they have? Don't they control everything? As you have just seen, the process with banks create money is so simple that the mind is repelled, and that's exactly the truth. This is so simple that most people simply cannot believe it can be true. The study of money, above all other fields in economics, and I'd leave out that word if it was me, is the one in which complexity is used to disguise truth or invade truth and not to reveal truth. John Kenneth Gabriel. When again, I repeat, we must never use that words are used either to entertain, inform, or deceive. And you better watch to see which is true. And we're going to show you that some things they say are true and some things they say that aren't. Now, this is right from the story of banks again. It says, now this is they're going to show you. Suppose West Side Bank with a deposit, which sounds like now they have to have a deposit before they can make a loan, and actually they got to make the loan before the deposit exists, keeps a reserve of 15% or $150, and it has a difference, $850 a loan. And Jeff, the planner says, I hope the payments aren't too wrenching. Now this clearly sounds like the banks loan depositors money, don't they? Because it said that when they got the deposit, they got to make a loan out of all but 15% of it. Now it says again in the next one, Westside takes Jake's promise to repay the loan, and creates a demand deposit, which we just explained, money he will spend by writing a check. So all money now comes into circulation when you borrow and then moves into circulation when you pass your checks around to move the money either by checks or electronics. Here it clearly states again that the bank takes the borrower's promise to pay and creates a brand new deposit. It doesn't take the deposit and create more money. Now we go on. Now again it goes back the other way. Jake writes a check for $850 to Slick, used truck company, which put Jake's check in the checking account at Eastside Bank. Wow, you got a bargain. Now here it comes again. Sounds like the banks are going to create money from the money deposited in the bank, not create new money. Both things can't be true. They either got to do one or the other. Then it goes on. Eastside gains $850 in deposits and holds a reserve of a 15%, or $127.50, leaving $620 to lend to Helen's Beauty Spa. And she said, man, that's what I need, a permanent capital. But the truth is, we have no permanent capital. We have no permanent money. Because money is a debt money. When it is repaid, the money is extinguished. It does not exist. So no money stays out there unless you're constantly in interest-bearing debt. We're going to skip this page. And now let's go back and look at Modern Money Secrets again on page 6. Now this is Modern Money Mechanics that I showed you a picture before. And now here's what they say about how it works. Of course, banks, they do not really make loans out of the money they receive as deposits. If they did, they would be acting like a financial intermediaries, and no additional money would be created. What they do when they make loans is accept promissory notes in exchange for credits to the borrower's demand deposit accounts. Loans, assets, and deposits liabilities both rise by the amount of the loans. Reserves are unchanged by the loan transactions, but the deposit credit constitutes new additional to the total deposits of the banking system, creating new spendable money. Now, many things have been used in the past as money. And this again came out of the comic book by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. They say at first common items like salt and cattle were used. And then in the 1700s, tobacco leaves, shot, wampum beads, about everything was used, money, tobacco leaves. But you got to understand, all of these things were money based on the production of real wealth. Something that really existed and either multiplied itself, or the people could do it by combining their labor, their ideas, and raw materials at the same time. The only way you can create wealth is you have to combine knowledge, labor, and raw resources at the exact same time. If you do, there's nothing that existed. And then what gives it value is whether somebody else would like to have it and give you something for it. In 1971, our founding fathers created a central bank. And I want you to really take note of this, to create credit debt money for this young nation. Then, in 1792, they passed a law that declared free coinage of gold and silver. This created wealth money. We got a total conflict here. Now, you can't tell me our founding fathers believed that gold and silver was the only money when the first thing they did was create a central bank to create debt money, and it wasn't the first thing they did. If they'd really believed that, the first thing they'd done was created a mint. And it's amazing, when they did this, they didn't even have a known gold or silver mine in this country. Now, I'm not real bright, but I'm smart enough to know if I was going to base my money on gold and silver, I better have a gold or silver mine in my country, don't you think? It just seems real logical to me. If I didn't have any source of it, I couldn't use it for money. I'd have to get it by trading with somebody or someplace. And now, all we use for money is numbers. Those numbers in those checking accounts we saw a while ago is actually the real source and the only money we really have. To get coins and currency, right now, that puts the government prints the currency and the mint makes the coins, but we can't get them in circulation until we take the checkbook money we have to borrow from the bank and go write a check on cash and take the coins and currency out of circulation. The cash, put them into circulation. The checkbook money goes out of circulation and the coins or currency comes into circulation, and there's been absolutely no change in the money supply. Now again, I said before, what is wealth? Now my definitions of wealth, and I got this from a poster I saw in California one time when out here speaking, comes from two basic sources: agriculture and mining. This includes the ocean. And it comes from farming, livestock, harvest, forestry, fishing, or from mining, coal, oil, metals, whatever. And everything we use comes from those natural resources. And by applying God's given physical and mental energy to agriculture and mining products, we produce everything we have. Everything, the tables, the chairs, the phones. There is no debt in this process. So now we're going to go through and show you exactly how the bills changed. First, they made us believe, although they was using bank credits all the time, there was always at least 6 times as much bank credited money as loans in this system as there ever been anything else. At least 6, and maybe up to high as 50 times more. But what I'm showing you here is now a silver certificate and a gold certificate side by side. You can see the gold, it's a little different gold color. Now these first came into existence when one time somebody talked them into we ought to have some more gold and silver in our country. So when foreign gold or silver would come in, they said you have to take that to this little spot up there by the shipping dock, and you must turn in your coins, and they would then weigh them and ask them and know just exactly what the value was. They would give you a silver certificate or a gold certificate, and you could take it out and spend it any place you wanted to. Then they take and recoin that money into United States coins. That's where the gold and silver come from. But now again, we want to understand what these things are, because it's very important what I'm going to say later about a solution. This certifies there is on deposit in the Treasury of the United States of America $1 or $10 of gold. Guaranteed it's there. They circulated the money and the metal stayed in the bulb. Our nation, both at the state and federal level, has a long history of turning to the banking system to provide a medium exchange for the people. The state started in Massachusetts in 1721 and had continued chartered banks ever since up to this day. In 1781, the Bank of North America was incorporated and given a federal charter by the Continental Congress to help fund the war for independence. I want to stop there a minute, because I've been told all my life that the Founding Fathers created continental currency to fund the war. And they printed so much of it, it became worthless. Well, if they printed so much of it, it became worthless, how come they had to turn and charter a bank to get more of it to fund the war? I mean, if you couldn't print up enough to fund the war, how could you turn to a bank and they print up some more as debt to you and fund the war? And of course, you got to understand the continental currency was also a debt, because it stated on its face, and I have held one in my hand, that this is redeemable in Spanish mill dollars or equivalent weight of gold or silver, which they didn't have any of it. But they did get immediately purchasing power by creating the new bills and spending them. Using the following note, we will show you how slowly, with small insignificant changes, our money system moved completely from any representation to gold or silver or any form of wealth to where now it risks interest-bearing debt. This bill shows you, and it says right on its face, what did I do? Get the wrong note in here? That's okay. First off, the very first one said, and I must have missed it, this note is redeemable in gold on demand. And it said down below, pay to the bank on demand. Then the next time they made the change, and I think I left that gold note out of here, this note is legal tender. So they made a small change there. They said, no, it wasn't redeemable in gold anymore. They took that away in 33, and then the notes come out, and this one's 34. This note is legal tender for all debt, public and private, and redeemable in lawful money, which they won't tell us what it is, at the United States Treasury or any Federal Reserve Bank, but it still had to pay to the bearer on demand. Now, in the next note says it's the exact same thing, except the wording is 3 lines instead of 4, but it still has the promise to pay. And then the next note down below says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and gone are the words promise to pay. So what I did is I took one of these notes that said pay to the bearer on demand, $10, and it was said it was sent out, the issuing bank was the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. So I wrote a letter and I sent it down to him and I said, here's enclosed a $20 bill that says you right on its face that you will pay me, the bearer, and I am the bearer, and I'm sending it to you, and I'm demanding the payment in dollars. So I want you to send me the dollars. And being I'm not sure I know what a dollar is, I don't want to fight with that over you, so would you please send me the statutory definition of the dollar when you send me whatever you're going to send me? I really don't care what it is, I just want to know what dollars are, really. And they just sent it back, they never even wrote a letter or anything. But one of them good did call me up and said, I got this letter today from you, and I just simply can't understand it. I said, well, it's very simple. Right, I got a note from you that clearly says on its face, you'll pay me dollars. And all I got to do is demand it. And I'm demanding it, so pay it to me. Oh, he says, I can't understand this. You got to talk to one of the lawyers. I said, well, if you give me one of their phone numbers, I'll go call them. Oh, don't worry about that. I'll just transfer you up. So pretty quick, a nice lady's voice come on the phone, and she'd never seen any of the letters. She didn't have a clue. It took me a while to explain it to her. And finally, she must have got it, because all of a sudden she goes, ah! And hung up the phone. And that's the truth. So then what we did, I had a friend that had a $500 gold note. So I said, let's send that in. Oh, he said, I don't think so. I don't want to lose my $500 note. I said, I guarantee you they will give it back. They will send it back to you. I don't think so. It took me a month and a half to talk him into that. So we finally agreed. I said, okay, we'll both sign the same letter. Here we want this. We don't want the gold. We just want the dollars. So they wrote that time. They sent it back and sent us a letter. Said, well, we used to use gold and silver, but we don't anymore. And there's no anything that requires to use gold and silver. And I think that's probably true. And so, but it still requires to have some kind of dollar, I would think. I mean, a dollar is a very common word, isn't it? I think I see it in most economic contracts, don't you? Well, then it must have some sort of a definition. And so, anyway, so they wouldn't do anything. So finally, we sued him in small claims court. Now, I knew I was going to lose, but I wanted to see what would happen. So I made up the small claim court, the whole thing, and turned it into court. And the girl at the court said, you can't do that. They're a federal agency. You can't sue a federal agency like this. I said, well, I don't think they are, but I don't want to stand here and argue with you. But I'll tell you what, you seem like a really nice lady, so if you'd be kind enough, I'll pay you the filing fee, and here's my address and my telephone number and everything. And if they send it back and said I can't do it, well, just call me up. I'll come and I'll apologize for taking your time, and we'll both know exactly what the facts are. She says, that sounds fair. She did it. So 2 days later, I got a court date down in Minneapolis Small Claims Court. No problem at all. So they set up the date, and Greg went down there. He's the guy that had the $500 bill. I didn't. And so we went in, and the Federal Reserve Attorney, I assume the same woman that screamed, I don't know this for a fact, she come up and says, you got any papers you want to change? And you're not going to bring up that issue about us not taking your notes back in the 80s, are you? I said, no, I'm not going to touch that today. This is just all about, I just want, I just want you to pay me what you owe me on the note I got. Okay, so we went in, the judge said, I don't have a clue what you're talking about. Of course, he'd never read anything and walked in the courtroom. I said, it's simple. I got a note that says they owe me, and I just wanted to pay me, and they refused. So I come to you just like everybody else to get, regress the grievance. Huh? So he turned to the Federal Reserve Attorney and he said, what do you got to say about this? Well, everything he says is true. He sent it to us, we sent it back, because after they made the note to legal tender, they became the payment of the obligation they represent. Well, you think about that. How would you like to sign a note at the bank and it became the payment for the money you just got? Wouldn't know anything, would you? That's what they said, how it works for them. And I assume what we get from them is legal tender. If it wasn't, how could we go out and buy things with it? I think we got a kind of a two-steered standard here, don't we? Now let's go on, because we want to really understand that money created in interest-bearing loans has very severe monetary consequences. Very, very severe monetary consequences. Because in the first place, you can only borrow the principal. You can't get the interest created. There's no way to do it. Now think about it. The banks say a promissory note from a guy that don't have any money is really good collateral. He don't have any money. You need to borrow it. So he creates it, and all he creates is the principal, so all he can pay back is the principal, so he can't possibly get off the loan. So I think that's why he makes you sign the mortgage on the property, so you can take everything you got. Now that probably is pretty good. Now that sounds like a pretty slick way to own all the property pretty quick, isn't it? And we have other consequences too. Money is power. Does anybody disagree with that? And money operates on certain principles, and that's what you really need to understand. It's not what you use for money, it's the principles on how it operates that makes the difference between whether you get destroyed as a nation or whether you became a great nation filled with wealthy citizens. Because money used under the wrong principles, like we'll do now, will destroy a nation every time, and it has every nation in history that's ever used it, that money. A study of the World Institute for Development of Economic Research at the United Nations University reports that the richest 1% of adults own 40% of all global assets. 1% of the adult population owns 40% of all the wealth in the world. Then you add the richest 10% of adults account for 85% of the total wealth. The bottom half, all the rest of us, get to fight over 1% of the global wealth. Or 1%, not very much. The 3 richest people in the world have assets exceeding the gross domestic production of the 48 least developed countries in the world. And this is all sourced. Now, next I show you a chart. And I got this out of the American Grandfather Economic Report, which is no longer on the web anymore, and it used to be one of the greatest resources I really loved to go that. He did great work, and I researched it. It came out almost equally with some of the same information I got personally from the Federal Reserve Board of New York, or Washington, D.C. And this shows you how the red line is how fast the debt is going up, and the blue line is how fast the income of the families are going up. Do you see a problem there? You can see that. This one here clearly is the red line, and that's how the debt's going up. This is how the income's going up. Now I'll go to the next page. Now this chart I made, actually my friend Greg made it. He's better at this than I am. I hate to admit those things, but this actually comes from a speech that David Walker, at that time, Comptroller General of the United States, gave in St. Paul, Minneapolis. One of these, reported in the St. Paul Press, 10/30/06. And at that time, in that speech, he indicated that the total wealth of the nation was about $38 trillion. The total assets at that time was only 54, now they're up to 57. Actually, it's 59 now. And the total unfunded liabilities of the federal government was 54 trillion. And the the Federal Reserve Bank of New York on that time said on their website said the total money supply was $7.7 trillion. $trillion. So what I did is, I happen to know the president of the Minnesota Senate quite well. He's a banker. So I went down to his office one day and I said, I'd sure like to see if I could get a loan from you. And he got kind of nervous. And I said, well, I really didn't want a loan. I just wanted to give you my financial statement, see if I'd qualify for a loan. So I told him, here's my financial statement. My total wealth is $38,000. My total outstanding debt right now is $54,000. I have unfunded bills coming up that's $54,000, and that's what I need to borrow the money for. My cash on hand is $7.7 thousand. Can I borrow the money? He said, hell, man, you're already broke. So I turned to him and I gave him this chart and I said, well, if you turn the thousands into trillions, that's the financial state of the United States. And when I left 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, he was still studying the chart. Now, this is the chart I made up from several sources of information that I got off the web and by searching the Department of Commerce and several other places. And the first one over on this side shows the black is the average income of a family of 4 in 1990. The red is the average interest load bill they had to pay at 6% interest on the total debt in 1990. The next one shows what it went up to 2005. Now the average income had increased to $43,500 per family, and their share of the debt had increased to $30,854. By 2016, the interest alone at 6%, the debt will be so big that the total interest load will be $1 billion greater than the total income. Do you anybody here see a problem that might happen from that? And the fact is, we can get no monetary benefit from our own production in any way without someone someplace borrowing credit money from the banking system. Our society has moved from a society that makes decisions not on what is good, right, or moral, but on what it costs and how much can be made monetarily. Our debt money system has produced a dog-eat-dog society, and you see it every day. Man, I got to hurry up. I only got 20 minutes. We're going to skip some things here because I really want to get a lot of pages here. Just go on down till we hit the solution, honey. Because this is what I really want to get to, because we have to have a way out of here. And the solution is so very simple. First off, most people don't understand we have both a state bank and a federal bank. But basically, this should be done at the federal level. But my experience has been that's almost impossible to deal with them guys. So I figured out a way that we could do it at the state level. But the truth is, the only way out of this is we've got to create money on the wealth of the people as a payment and spend it into circulation without interest or taxes. Does that make sense to you? How else could you get out of debt? Now we have, and all true money should represent your production, not your debts. We have a bill in Minnesota, and it's over now because the bankers really, I got a hearing on this bill 2 years ago in both the House and the Senate. I didn't get it passed, and I had a really good hearing in the Senate, and nobody testified at neither one except in the Senate. The banker got up and said, well, I agree with almost everything he said. The debt's too large and all these other things, but even if you passed the bill, it wouldn't work because banks can't create money. I now have a chart from the Department of Commerce of Minnesota that starts out, banks create money, and then shows me how to do it. So this basic bill is really very simple. It's so simple it won't take me 20 minutes to explain it, but you might take me longer for that. You ask me questions so I can get you to understand it. It's very simple. We now, through a state banking system, we as the states get to control all the activity of the state banks. That's not true because you've got to remember we have both a federal banking system and a state banking system. The federal banking system is controlled by the federal and controlled by the federal legislature and controlled by the federal regulators. The state banking system is controlled by the state laws. So all we got to do is pass a bill, and that bill's there, and it's already introduced there, and this year didn't, but it's now also been introduced in the state of Arizona. Written a little different, but the same exact concept. We simply go to them and say now, the law requires you to create enough money and spend it into circulation to rebuild all the roads in Minnesota. Or all the roads that people in Minnesota need. And not only do we want you to build them up, we want you to, I was talking to a union man that was in building construction a lot in roads, and he said, man, we could heat these roads like nothing. When you build a road, you got to build a foundation just like you do with a house. So when we're down to building a foundation, if we just stuff the pipes in the ground, all it takes a little electricity to heat the roads and keep all the ice off with geothermal heat. Then in the summertime, if they get real hot, all you'd have to do is turn it on to cool them some. Can you imagine how long your roads would last, how much longer, and how much you wouldn't have all these potholes because they wouldn't have all this ice freezing. You wouldn't have all this salt going to your lakes and rivers and streams and all that stuff. You'd solve all these problems. We could also, if you wanted to, you could put filters in the culverts and filter all the water, and we'd have the cleanest water you could ever have in the world. And that's how simple it is. That's really how simple it is. And then you go through, and when this money is spent, it first goes to the people who do the work, the contractor and the people who he hires to do it, and the equipment he buys and all this stuff, the raw materials, and then they go spend it to do other things. Go on down a little bit, honey. And this is, go one more. One more. There. This is how it will work. We will simply create the money as numbers on the checking account exactly like they do now. No change. When you write your check, that money will go into circulation, and nobody in the world will know any different than any other money you have. We'll spend any place in the United States, any place else you want to go. And all you got to do is now, instead of a promissory note from a guy that don't have any money, can't create any money, you will simply use the value of the roads you're going to build or improve as the value and basis to create that money and put it in circulation. Does that make any sense to anybody but me? And that's how simple it is. And then we go on down, and then, of course, when it moves the money, that moves from checking account, just like it does any other time, when it goes from the banks into the state transportation account, and then they spend it to the contractor's account. He goes down, then you go down, and the contractor, the workers, they spend it, the contractors spend it to hire workers and to buy equipment, to buy raw materials. Then they take it, and everybody just does like the now. Most of the time, most people I know work for contractors, construction work. When they get their check, they go home and buy a beer on the way home, and they give the money to the wife, and she pays the bills. Isn't that kind of how it works? Okay, now that goes to pay for food and for housing and for transportation, and maybe you make your own payments. It even helps the banks, believe it or not, because now they won't have all the bad loans. The only reason the bank goes bad and goes up and out of business, and they do, is because somewhere some silly banker thought it's a good idea. All the smaller banks below me would have to write off all their losses of principal when a loan goes bad against their profit. So we can break them, but I have a sneaking suspicion, and I can't prove that don't quite apply to the biggest banks. Anybody think that would make sense? Okay, so that's how simple it is. Now we have better roads, we have money in circulation, our tax bill goes down. If you take the interest and the taxes out of the system, how much do you think you'd have more expendable money out of your paycheck every time? A lot, wouldn't you? Because if the taxes and interest and all the deductions went out of your paycheck, and of course it would take a while to get all the taxes out, but you'd immediately get the taxes out that you use now to buy gas. Your gas would go down at least 20 to 40 cents immediately because they wouldn't have to tax anymore to pay for the build the roads. And this is what I think we really, really have to get to. According to the Minnesota Constitution, the objection of government. Government is instituted for the security, the benefit, and the protection of the people, in whom all political power is inherent, together with the right to alter, modify, and reform government whenever required by the public good. I see no place in here that says government is instituted for the protection and the benefit of the bankers. Did anybody else read that when I read it the first time? Hear bankers in that thing? And yet that's all they do. Bankers and the corporations that grow up around them. That's what Jefferson said. If the American people ever allow the banks to control the issue of money, the banks and the corporations that grow up around them will control everything. And with that, I finish, and I thank you, and I will stand for questions. And if you ask me a question I can't answer, you have to buy me supper.
Okay.
I think this guy honestly ought to get it first. I saw his family, and then I'll take whoever I see standing the mic next.
You're not going to be able to answer my question.
Oh, okay. Well, he's leaving then. Are you willing to let him go first then? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I live in the state of Arizona, so I'd like to know the name of the bill that is being penned so that I can support it.
I can't give you that right now. I don't have it, but I can get it to you.
Okay.
Now, one other thing I wanted to add, and I want to add this before I go any further. We can accomplish this. I need your help. I do not need your money. Not because I have too much of it, because we don't need it. What I need is this finger and this and this. I guarantee you the bankers don't want this bill and will fight it. But I guarantee you, if all the people in this room would call at the exact same time Carl Steele wanted you to call that bill in Arizona, and that phone rang in his office and his wife's home and on his kids' cell phones and everything else, how long do you think before Mama would make him sign the bill? I have seen it work many times, and that's all we need to do to get this bill passed. I can't do it alone, Carl Steele can't do it alone, and nobody else. But if we could get the people who really want freedom to prove it, and the time comes, get on that phone and don't get off until them guys pass that bill, we'll have it done before the year's over. Go ahead.
How do I phrase this question? We've got a bunch of politicians who are essentially based in Washington, D.C., but live in the States. Most, I hate to say, are corrupt. Many are attorneys who are corrupt. Who's going to be running this bank? Who? How do you? It's a great idea. I love it. But who's going to be running it? That's my question.
Go to the next slide, would you, dear? There. Nope. Yeah. Whoa, whoa. There. That's the one I want. Can everybody kind of see that? This bill is designed that the people who want and need the bill must request it. They will not be able to decide what roads are built or how much it's going to cost. The roads will all be built exactly are they now. When the people demand the road or demand it fixed, then they will simply go and say, the state, we need this. They will simply hire the engineers they got right now. My brother-in-law used to be one of them. They will design, they will design the exact specifics of how that road should be built. How deep and how depth of the grade and all this stuff and how wide and all these things. Then it will be put out on public bids to contractors. They will bid on it just like they do now, and the contractor now has to put up a bond, to guarantee they finish the road. Nothing will change, just like it is now. The people themselves will decide if they need the road. When they decide they need the road, and basically we have a Minnesota Transportation Association that was formed years ago, and it was formed by a bunch of farmers who could not get out of their property with their goods because the roads were too dang muddy and everything all the time, and they went and demanded the state build them some roads. And that's how it should work. It should come from bottom up, not top down. Does that answer your question?
Who runs the bank?
The bank will be run by the state legislature.
Same legislature we have now?
That's right, but the rules will change. Because remember, if we put a law in and enforce it, if you have to, by throwing them in jail or whatever you got to do, find them if they don't do it, that they must create the money when we need it to build these roads. They have no say-so in the matter. We'll let them for a while go right on, create money just like they do now. It'll be very good for them because now people will have the money without debt to pay their interest. There won't be so many bad loans. They will do better. The people will all do better. Everybody will have more jobs, more money. Taxes will go down. Interest will go down. Any other questions?
You and Walter, you're in together.
Well, we just might. 5 more minutes. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. People who know me often tell me I have an evil turn of mind, but I suspect that there are people out there in the wide world who would not like your plan to go into effect because they're enjoying the way they have us over the barrel.
I don't suspect that. I know that.
So if you were one of them, what would you do to defeat this plan, even if it could be put into state law?
Oh, I'd fight and huff and holler. But remember, if we keep calling mama, I guarantee you the legislature will support us. You got to understand, the people have to stand up and do something besides eat, meet, and retreat. And ask somebody else to give them some money. And I'm not against anybody. I think a lot of people out here are doing great work and need support. But we got to get down to the root cause and solve it and stop it and change it. I'm tired of fooling around. Anybody here with me? Yeah. I would like to have everybody that honest to God would do this come up and sign their name on my sheet. So when I get ready, I can start contacting you. I've obviously got to go talk to Carl Steele and Robert. I never can pronounce his last name, so I'm not going to try. Okay, and so when we can organize, so when they know exactly when they need to put pressure on the chairman of the committee, wherever it goes to in Arizona, and it's just been introduced, not in the last month or so. They haven't done a lot of work yet. We're really on top of the game here. We're really in the ball game at the right time, not like with me in Minnesota where it come in late. I never could get that many people to support me. And if every one of you would call everybody you know and to get them to agree to help you do the same thing, we can get this done. Now, I'm not going to say that the fight's going to be over, but once we show and they know that we're all in this together, it's going to be a different story. And believe it or not, the banks actually like this. I've got a letter from the president of the Minnesota Bank Association that said, we're not opposed to your idea, we just don't understand how it works. Because, see, the only thing they can see as the basis to create money is a promissory note they get interest on. They can't, their minds can't take it any further than that. But we could. Go ahead.
Age before beauty.
Go ahead. You're not allowed to speak. Go ahead.
Is it on now? No. You've said the banks are the only ones that can create money. Now, I heard you speak one time and talk about a racehorse. Would you please give this audience about the racehorse story? Because I think that's an excellent example.
I got to interview. If I got time to humor Dan a minute. Years ago, when I used to give a lot of speeches, I had the Federal Reserve. I mean, this book I have called, I showed you Tales to the Treasury, and then there it shows where the banks can loan $6 for one. Well, that was the time I had my ranch yet, and I thought, man, that's a good idea. And I had a big, beautiful brown horse. I mean, he was outstanding, and this part's true. And so one day a young guy came in and said, man, I've seen that horse that I drive by, and I'd love to ride, and I'd love to ride again, but I have no place to ride, and I have no horse to ride with. Oh, and I can only ride at 8 o'clock in the morning. Well, man, young man, I think we could make a deal with you that way. We could work that out. So I sold him my horse, and I made a deal to saddle the horse up for him for a small fee, and I made a deal to feed the horse for him. And he just loved it. He come over by every day at 8 o'clock, rode that horse, and he just grinned like a son of a gun when he left. And it went really good. And then one day another guy come along. He said, you know, I've been watching that horse. I go by, and I love to ride, but I just don't have any time to ride except 10 o'clock in the morning. I don't have a horse to ride, and I don't know where to ride. Well, young man, I think we could solve that problem. So I sold him my horse, and I made a deal to feed the horse for him, and made the deal to saddle the horse up for him. And he come in at 10 o'clock, and it worked like a charm. And the next thing you know, I'd done that 6 times. And it was just beautiful, and I loved it. And then them guys, I couldn't believe they would do that to a nice man like me. They went in one Saturday night drinking a little beer and boasting about how good that horse was. Now, you know, when you get a few beers in, you get to feeling pretty good, and they got to bragging about how fast that horse could run and how each one of them liked him. And pretty one of them said, I'll bet you my horse can outrun your horse. And so they agreed to have a horse race on Sunday. And man, when I heard this, man, the sweat just rolled out of me. In fact, I had the first notion, that's kind of called a run on the bank, you know. My first notion was I should take that horse and leave town because I knew he's the fastest. I knew he's the only one. I was the only one that did. But you know, I thought that over, and that was such a good deal. I just hated to give it up. And I'd made a lot of money by charging for the horse and charging for saddling him and charging for feeding him. I only had to saddle up one horse. I only had one horse to sell, and I only had to feed one horse. This was a really good deal. And I thought this over real hard. And I said, you know, I got a better idea than leaving town. I'll just go see a few of my state legislators and say, you know, I've done really well in business lately, and, you know, I've heard that these guys are talking about gambling, racing horses on Sunday, and I really think that's really bad for the morals of the city and the country. So I'd put a lot of money in your next campaign if you'd pass a law that they can't gamble and race horses on Sunday. Have you ever thought that that's maybe going on? Go ahead.
What happens to $59 trillion worth of debt that we already have?
Sooner or later, the truth is you have to just write it off.
And
you
so
can't possibly produce enough at this time to get rid of it.
And all these people are just going to walk away and say no problem.
No problem.
China's going to walk away and say no problem. The money cartels for all this time is just going to walk away and say no problem.
Well, they might, but you know, we have the biggest army in the world, and they're just only 1% of the population. It wouldn't be too tough to take them out.
Navy, too.
But see, you also have to do a lot of thinking about that. I put a lot of thought in that. Because the first thing, it would be very easy to just tell the banks, well, you created it out of nothing anyway. You've already got all you're going to get. Wipe it off the books. Now, the guys like my brother-in-law, who worked all his life, building roads in Minnesota, by the way, designing them, and he put a lot of his money into government bonds because it was the safest place to do it. You're going to have to honor those. So there's a point you're going to have to decide morally and legally on which ones you're going to have to honor, because you can't keep, for example, you're going to have to keep funding Social Security for a few years, because if you didn't, my wife and I'd starve, and I wouldn't appreciate that.
So you're saying that we're going to just have to decide exactly what to do now, which people are we going to screw and which one we aren't?
You can't screw a man that didn't loan you anything.
What?
You can't
But
screw
the
a man
people
that
who have
didn't
the
loan you anything.
the people who bought the bonds bought the bonds, bottom line.
But they bought it with money they created out of thin air that they didn't even have.
Those people, not everybody.
No, but a lot of them did. Most
I
of them
mean,
did.
China.
All the banks that bought bonds did it that way. So did the Federal Reserve System and a lot of other countries. Now, as far as China, you could pay them. Hey, they got the notes, let them keep them. They knew what they was getting into. Besides, that all went to central banks anyway. They don't use that money in their country. It wouldn't hurt them at all. Because all that money that we've sent there went to the central bank and stayed there, and they simply loaned it back to it because it was non-interest-bearing loans, and now they turned it into interest-bearing loans.